could stay alive on most surfaces for up to 7 days before losing potency. On others, including glass, it could remain infectious for a month. Here's medical reporter Sophie Scott.
The dreaded cough. It's well understood how it can expel droplets containing coronavirus. If it lands on a surface and is picked up by someone who then touches their face, that person can contract COVID-19. Now, scientists from the CSIRO have found the risk of picking up the virus in the environment is higher than previously thought.
We took a sort of an artificial mucus and we suspended a set amount of virus in this solution and then dried it onto different materials.
Their research shows at a temperature of 20 degrees, the virus remains potent for up to a month on glass surfaces such as touchscreens, stainless steel objects such as cutleries and handrails, and polymer banknotes.
It's really important that, as we know right from the start, the importance of hand washing, the importance of cleaning and sanitising, both for ourselves as individuals, but also for those high-touch surfaces.
On substances like cotton, the virus didn't survive longer than 14 days. And when the temperature rose to 30 degrees, the virus didn't survive past 7 days. During the pandemic, we've been urged not to use cash, and that would seem to be good advice, with this research suggesting the virus can live for up to 28 days on plastic notes. But experts caution the research may not reflect what happens in the real world.
This is certainly not going to be the primary mode of viral transmission in the community, and we see that. It's a mode of transmission, but it's not the primary viral mode.
And that means while hand washing remains an important part of infection control, so does keeping your distance and mask wearing. Sophie Scott, ABC News.
The New South Wales Premier has refused to resign over her relationship with the disgraced ex-MP. Gladys Berejiklian says she stuffed up over her 5-year relationship with former MP Daryl Maguire. He's at the centre of a corruption investigation and was forced to resign in 2018. Ms Berejiklian says if she'd known what she knows now, she wouldn't have made the same decisions.
I don't want to take away the responsibility for my actions and say I'm human, but I am. I'm human and I stuffed up in my personal life.
It rots from the top because she knows what she's been involved in. And today she has been unmasked. Gladys Berejiklian has no choice but to resign.
Government ministers have thrown their support behind the Premier. Well, let's return to the fragile ceasefire between Armenia and Azerbaijan, broken within just minutes of the truce. I'm joined now live from Paris by Alex Melikishvili, a research analyst specialising in the North Caucasus with data firm IAHS Markit. Alex, nice to talk to you again. Why did the ceasefire turn out to be so shaky?
Thank you very much, Beverly, for having me. I mean, the ceasefire basically fell apart approximately 14 hours after it was announced, because over the weekend we saw the second attack on the second largest city in Azerbaijan, Ganja, in contrast with the previous attack which occurred on 4th of October. This time around, the Armenian side used the Tochka-U short-range ballistic missile, which fell in the densely populated residential area, producing at least 7 casualties and 34 people wounded and about 8 houses demolished. So we can't speak about any ceasefire. The combat is continuing in Nagorno-Karabakh conflict zone, and it shows the limits of Russian influence over the belligerents, over Moscow's ability to cajole them into a cessation of hostilities.
Here's such a good point, as Russia has come out and said, urging both sides to respect the ceasefire, but it's clearly not having any impact. Do you think Russia is going to be able to play a role? Will any other nation be able to step in?
Yeah, what makes this situation dramatically different with all the previous iterations of conflagration that we witnessed in Nagorno-Karabakh has to do with Turkey's role. Turkey is very strongly supporting Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev, in all of his recent interaction with international media, including Russian media, made it very clear that Azerbaijan wants to change the current format of negotiations over Nagorno-Karabakh. As audience probably may know, Right now, you have Russia, United States, and France mediating the talks that produced little results, to be honest with you. And Azerbaijan has been increasingly dissatisfied with that format. So I think the idea from the Azeri angle is to include Turkey as one of the mediators in the format. And Turkey's participation will probably pave the way for the cessation of hostilities.
So who do you think, who do you think has the upper hand at the moment, Azerbaijan or Armenia? Azerbaijan, from the sound of things.
Without a doubt, Azerbaijan has an upper hand in this situation. To kind of simplify things, right now, Armenia is in an unevenly matched fight in Nagorno-Karabakh. But we have to also remember one very important caveat. As long as the combat is limited to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict zone and doesn't spill over into Armenia proper, the bilateral defense and security commitment that exists between Russia and Armenia do not get triggered. And President Putin actually mentioned that during his interview last week, saying specifically that, from Russian point of view, the hostilities are limited, are boxed in by the Karabakh conflict zone, and that means that Russia's obligations vis-à-vis Armenia do not get triggered.
Where does it leave thousands of Armenians who, of course, predominantly occupy this area that has become so disputed?
Well, the situation is really dire in Nagorno-Karabakh because under the relentless artillery and rocket and missile attacks of the Azeri armed forces, essentially the capital of the breakaway region, Stepanakert, the Azeri name for it is Khankendi, is being emptied out. You have already hundreds of people becoming essentially refugees, streaming into Armenia proper, fleeing it. And if I'm not mistaken, off the top of my head, the mayor of Stepanakert, Khankendi, said that only about 40 to 50% of the population remains in the city.
That's going to be a humanitarian disaster in the waiting. Alex, thank you so much as always.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, 2 Americans have won the Nobel Prize in Economics for their work to improve how auctions work. Paul Milgrom and Robert Wilson were honoured for creating new auction formats for the sales of goods and services and clarifying how bidders behave. Their discoveries have benefited sellers, buyers and taxpayers around the world. Well, Microsoft has become the latest employer to give staff the choice of working from home permanently. It follows a rapid shift around the world away from office working prompted by the coronavirus pandemic. Microsoft's move follows similar decisions by rival tech giants Facebook and Twitter. Well, to what in the world? And after obviously getting a little tired of waiting, an impatient bride confronted her fiancé at his workplace, a Target store. In videos posted to TikTok, a woman strides through the store in the US with a bridesmaid and pastor in tow before ambushing her startled groom-to-be while he was stacking shelves.
I'm done. Like, if you don't marry me this second, I brought the pastor. I brought Emily. She's my bridesmaid. Hi, guys. I'm just finally making him commit, Like, we're getting married now or, like, it's over.
Woo! Do it!
Didn't he look uncomfortable? What we can't tell you is whether the ultimatum paid off and her fiancé agreed to go through with these spontaneous nuptials. But if nothing else, let's hope if they register, they'd get a great discount at Target. You're watching The World. Our top stories tonight. The Pope has met with Cardinal George Pell at the Vatican. India has become the second country after the United States to report 7 million COVID-19 cases. And a fragile ceasefire fails to hold up between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Well, let's return to our top story. And the Pope has met with Cardinal George Pell at the Vatican. The meeting was confirmed in the Holy See's daily bulletin. Cardinal Pell returned to Rome a fortnight ago after a nearly 3-year absence. When he left Rome in 2017, Cardinal Pell was the Vatican Secretariat of the Economy, a powerful position in which he oversaw the Catholic Church's vast finances. It's Cardinal Pell's first meeting with the Pope since his child sex abuse convictions were quashed in April. Well, the UK's top health official has warned the country is at a tipping point with urgent action needed to stop the resurgence of COVID-19. The virus began to circulate among young people as the economy reopened. The Deputy Chief Medical Officer says it's now spreading to older people, raising fears that the hospital system will be overwhelmed. 13,000 cases were confirmed in the last 24 hours, 65 deaths. Prime Minister Boris Johnson is to unveil a new round of restrictions likely to include restaurant and pub closures, with the toughest measures aimed at hotspots in northern England. Well, as one of the world's highest earning apps, it's reinvented dating for millions of people, but an ABC investigation has now revealed the darker side of Tinder. Nearly 200 Australians say that they've been sexually assaulted or harassed on the popular app, and the majority of those who reported the abuse to Tinder received no response. And just a warning, you may find this story distressing.
Tinder is the most popular dating app in Australia, and it's helped make meeting up with strangers the new normal. But it's also created a playground for sex offenders, leaving victims neglected.
I guess I was trying to find love or to try and find someone to be in a relationship with.
On the third date with her Tinder match, a man drove Brooke to secluded bushland and convinced her to get into the back seat of a car.
He, then pulled his pants off and just went for it and just raped me.
The next morning, Brooke wanted to report the attack to Tinder, but she says the man had blocked her by using Tinder's unmatch function, which deleted their entire chat history.
I guess that was one of probably the main reason that I didn't go to the police, was because I didn't have his number, I didn't know his last name.
More than 400 people have responded to a Triple J hack call-out on dating apps and sexual assault. Many said they'd experienced rape and assault, like Brooke, and there was a pattern of rapists using Tinder's unmatching function to disappear from their victims' phones.
The fact that perpetrators are now getting a little bit wise to this and realizing that it's their way of escaping any kind of accountability, that's just unacceptable.
It's like they're sort of beating the system where they can just sort of re-offend almost.
The joint Four Corners and Triple J hack investigation has also found Tinder isn't responding to the majority of complaints.
They're not necessarily investing in consumer protections or safety features.
Tinder's parent company Match Group declined to be interviewed, but in a statement it said it's outraged some users may experience fear or worse when looking to meet someone special. It didn't respond to questions about the unmatching function. Avani Dias, ABC News.
Well, the Prime Minister's car has been vandalised during a protest at the University of Queensland. Refugee rights activists threw red paint and tomatoes at the doors of the Bioengineering Institute, prompting police to put the building into lockdown. Scott Morrison's car was caught in the crossfire before police arrived to restore calm. The PM had been touring the university's vaccine labs.
Let him go, you scum!
Mr Morrison was hustled out of a side entrance and into a waiting police vehicle. The standoff delayed his departure. Well, a leading strategic thinker has issued a stark warning that Australia can no longer rely on its Asian allies and the US to defend itself against China. The ANU's Hugh White sets out his case in the latest edition of the Australian Foreign Affairs Journal. He says Australia's strategic positioning is declining.
China's growing assertiveness, to put it no more strongly, and with much lower confidence that the United States is going to be able to do what we'd like it to do, to play the role we've always relied on it to play in supporting us in these more difficult strategic circumstances. And that raises a whole lot of questions about what Australia should be doing instead. One of the really big themes we've seen from this government, and for that matter from Labor earlier on, was the idea that as China's power grows and as it becomes more worrying for us and as we become less confident in the United States, the natural thing for us to do is to turn to our Asian neighbours. And there's some logic in that as far as it goes, but what I found in the Defence Update published back in July was that the government is really starting to put all its eggs in that basket. That is really focusing on the idea that if or as China becomes more threatening, we'll be able to rely on other Asian countries to help us defend ourselves, to help defend the regional order. And I think that is way too optimistic. The fact is that it takes a lot of close alignment of strategic interests and objectives for countries to really cooperate effectively together like that, as the NATO partners did, of course, during the Cold War. And I don't think in Asia we see that kind of alignment of interests and objectives. I think that the countries of Asia are too diffuse, too dispersed geographically, and they have so many conflicting interests of their own with China that the idea that we can all cooperate together against China, I think, is way too optimistic, and therefore I think the government has to rethink the emphasis they're putting on that model. The government is hoping that by depending on regional countries, we can keep spending something like what we're spending at the moment, about 2% of GDP. I think that's very optimistic. If Australia's going to be a middle power in a much more difficult circumstances that the government acknowledges we have, we're going to have to spend a lot more money, and we're going to have to spend it a lot smarter than we're spending it at the moment.
Well, the challenges of the pandemic and climate change shows that the world needs to be guided by science more than ever before. But as the demand for leadership grows, women are still being disproportionately excluded from such roles. A new documentary called The Leadership details an ambitious initiative where 76 female scientists travelled to Antarctica to put their skills to the test and learn how to become better leaders. I'm joined from Beijing by one of those women, environmentalist Song Chao Yao. Great to have you with us. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Great to be here.
This would have been a very unique experience. What did you hope to gain from it when you set off to Antarctica?
I can only speak from personal experience, but I always had a childhood dream to go, and this is the last wilderness, and it's a land that's shared by all countries of the world. And to be there with 76 other women who have such amazing background and life stories, science, and helping and protect sustainability. I think I just had expectations to grow, to learn, and to be inspired, to actually have the motivation to keep doing what I'm doing.
Now, 76 women, or 76 people, I guess, all thinking about leadership and the roles they play would have been challenging. You were also an assistant to Fabian Dattner, whose vision it was to put this together. Her leadership style during this was sorely tested. What do you think it exposed?
I think it's really, the experience is kind of like a confluence of different rivers, right? And you have different person bringing their culture, their practice, things that have been helped in different contexts. And people come from all different walks of life, although they're all in science, some from industry, some from academia, and some from communications. So I think it actually exposes more questions than answers about, you know, there's no one unified leadership model. And in fact, that's actually a very male-dominated West-centric idea, to have this unifying model and we're all here to be trained like that. It's actually an opportunity for everyone to be reflective and to be able to grow and collaborate and also explore areas of themselves they didn't know. So I think it really exposed a lot about our past, the things we have experienced in our respective cultures and previous experiences, but also our hopes and, you know, how to actually be better and work together better.
Let's pick up on that point you made about different cultural experiences. I'm really fascinated to, you know, from somebody like yourself from Beijing and from Chinese culture, what were the differences that you experienced among the different people on this trip?
I was the only Chinese participant in the first cohort, and I think my experience coming from the Chinese society, and I grew up in China going through public schools up until high school, was really in a more collective and community-minded setting, where on the ship in Antarctica, which is this very small space, everyone had so much opinion, and you know they all had ideas of how things should be run in a certain way. But I was actually trying to seek balance and harmony in a sense. And then I think that's when I realized that, you know, I have a tendency of wanting to seek this community consensus, but also avoiding conflict a little bit. But actually, it's also healthy to expose these different ideas, to have argument, to have things to be challenged. And I think just like it has left me a lot of things to think about and to keep on practicing. later.
Do you think did you have discussions about whether women's leadership style differed from male leadership styles and whether the women had to become more like the men?
We definitely had, and I think some women have really practiced it that way. You know, a lot of discussion about lean in, about like being there at the leadership table, faking it until you make it, is that, you know, we have to survive, and to be in some male-dominated world, you have to forget about your gender to actually reach a leadership position. But it's not always the best way. And I think we have witnessed a lot of challenges we're facing in today's world were a result of this systemic problem. So we actually, I think we want to collectively imagine a new world, and where women are at the leadership table, and actually there's more collaboration and there's more community-focused discussion, especially in science, in these areas that's really determining our future. So I think we had these discussions, and it's ongoing because Homeward Bound has had 4 voyages now to Antarctica, and there's 6 more to come. So it's going to be a very rich body of discussion, research, and conversations going onward.
The critical thing is, do you feel you're going to get a better seat at the table? Do you feel, you know, what do you think holds women back in terms of being recognised in these critical STEM careers?
I think there's multiple things. You know, there's the structural challenges about things around access to education for women, in particular cultural and country context. And there's also structural challenges around maternity leave, about balancing field work, research, perhaps starting their own research projects. And there's also perceived public media notion around where is the women's role, like how should a scientist look like? And I think this has gradually changed over the past 20, 30 years, but still I think people don't always expect or see female representation of science leaders in popular media. And hopefully this is gradually changing. But even some places we have laws and regulations, but they're not reinforced right. So, you know, it's such a diverse topic and with lots of multiple challenges. And women have to also support each other and be the example and show each other strength, and how to actually help mentor younger women so that the pipe doesn't leak, you know, whether it is after high school or after maternity leave, after PhDs. It
strikes me that throughout this whole COVID crisis, I've hardly seen one woman really, you know, leading a response in almost any country that I can think of.
I think in some countries, like in Germany or in New Zealand, you know, where you have female leaders, they have been responding to the crisis.
But not the scientific response, if you know what I mean, or the health response.
Yeah. I think it's maybe this also exposed the structural challenges right now we have, right? And it's also, scientists have predicted the pandemic, and also keeps warning us about the challenge of climate change and biodiversity loss. But, you know, we right now keep facing the impact of it rather than having a coordinated response and trying to really solve it from the roots.
Yeah. China, of course, is pushing forward with bold ambitions for climate change, and that's to be carbon neutral by 2060. Do you think that's good enough? Do you think it's achievable?
I think it's achievable, and I think it must be good. I think it must be achieved, because I think there needs to be a country that actually set the leadership role for climate change, when we're actually witnessing no other countries in the world willing to take such initiative. And, you know, the idea about peaking carbon emissions before 2030 was announced before around the Paris Agreement time. So I think it's actually, you know, I think China needs to be on track of this, and there's lots of discussions about moving the consumption and the economic model towards a more climate resilient way. And as China is hosting the Biodiversity Summit next year, I think there will be more public interest and mobilization around this, and certainly we hope to be part of it.
Lovely to talk to you, really great. I'm fascinated to continue to watch how those programs play out. Thanks for your time.
Thanks. Go see the film.
We will indeed. And I should remind people that The Leadership is open nationally in cinemas around the country. That's the name of the documentary. It's called The Leadership. Of course, in Melbourne, we're still under lockdown, so we won't be able to get to cinemas. But environmentalist Song Chao Yao, the only Chinese representative on board. Well, at least 18 people have been killed and 44 injured after a bus collided with a train in Thailand. The bus was heading to a temple for a ceremony to mark the end of Buddhist Lent. The crash happened 2 hours east of Bangkok when the bus was hit by a freight train as it crossed over railway tracks. At least 8 people have been killed and dozens injured after a gas station in the Nigerian capital exploded. Dozens of buildings nearby were destroyed from the blast, among them a private school which had just reopened after COVID restrictions were lifted. The explosion was heard just a few hours before students were due at the school. Authorities are investigating the cause of the incident. It's the second explosion to hit Lagos in 2 months. Let's stay in Nigeria, where the police have been forced to disband its Special Anti-Robbery Squad, also known as SARS, as hundreds rally against the controversial unit. Police used tear gas to disperse the crowds as protesters in the country's capital condemned the squad for their alleged use of brutal methods to fight crime.
Stop killing our boyfriends! Stop killing our children! Stop! Mothers are crying! Stop killing them!
Authorities had pledged to either disband or reform the group multiple times in recent years, although critics say with very little visible change. The move comes after video of alleged members of the SARS unit shot a man in the state of Delta. Well, the traditional owners of ancient sites destroyed by Rio Tinto in the Pilbara in May have released vision of the aftermath of the blasts. The PKKP people provided the material to a parliamentary hearing that has heard a gag clause prevented them from speaking out before the explosions.
Months after Rio destroyed the Jukan caves, the damage has finally been made public.
This is one of the caves that you can see visually. This is a Jukan 1 cave. Further to the left is the Jukan 2 cave. Is completely covered by the gravels and that after the detonations. Burial sites, everything.
The vision is courtesy of Rio and was released to a parliamentary inquiry where PKKP representatives made rare public criticisms of the miner, revealing in the days before the blast, Rio's lawyers reminded them not to speak out or they'd breach a gag clause.
I would never ever trust Rio again.
The hearing also heard Rio kept loading explosives even after the PKKP people had protested about the imminent destruction of the caves.
Don't let this happen. Never let this happen. Don't trust the people you put the trust to.
The parliamentary hearing was held via teleconference because of the McGowan government's strict border control measures, which have so far stopped the interstate members of the parliamentary committee entering WA.
We think a physical site visit is necessary of the committee to appreciate the extent of this disaster and to fully respect the trauma and the pain being experienced by PKKP people.
The Police Commissioner manages the exemption process, but I just say to everyone, we have rules that apply to everyone about going and visiting remote Aboriginal communities, and that's there to protect Aboriginal people.
In a statement, Rio Tinto said it reiterates that what happened at Jukan Gorge was wrong. The committee's chairman, Warren Ench, says he can't hand down the inquiry's findings without visiting the Pilbara. Eliza Borrello, ABC News.
In a first for any local government in the country, Logan City Council has begun